Hey everyone, welcome back to Level Up, the Career Playbook, aka How to Be Better at Your Job. I am your host, Brian Bell, a 15-year HR vet, and big believer that with the right playbook, anyone can win at work. All right, reminder, this podcast started because I and many others that I know went through layoffs. And after years of working in HR, I realized there are a lot of unspoken rules, unwritten moves, and career cheat codes that but the best people know, but most folks don't get to learn unless they have a great mentor. Those cheat codes help them stay a bit more layoff and recession proof. So I decided to build that playbook by talking to people who are doing it right. Today's guest is someone who is doing it right as well and doesn't just talk about it, they live it. Chris Sims is the founder of Agile Learning Labs, a certified Scrum trainer, and quite frankly, one of the most engaging voices out there on real team collaboration and what that looks like. If you think Agile is just sticky notes and stand-up meetings, Chris is here to blow that up a little bit. So whether you work in tech, HR, finance, run a school, or even at home, this episode is going to shift the way you think about teamwork, leadership, and how people actually get stuff done. All right, let us dive in because this is going to be a really, really great episode. Chris, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I am doing really well. I'm a little nervous, but kind of excited to be on the show and see where it goes.
I get nervous every time we hit record as well. So in about 5 minutes or so, it'll all wear off and we'll just have a great conversation. Thank you for joining. And a little background. This is the Level Up podcast, the Career Playbook. So it's a sports related theme brought to you by MambaHR. And really the Mamba mentality is falling in love with the process and being dedicated to the step-by-step improvement. Having it be a sports related theme, I'm going to have sports related segments. Maybe it's corny, but that's how I've been dividing this up. So the first segment we're going to call the pregame. Let's talk about foundational years, career origins, just starting from the beginning. But first, before we get into like the deeper questions, can you tell the audience, the people watching or listening, an elevator pitch of who you are? And why do you think I was so eager to have you as a guest and why you were actually recommended as a guest?
To be really honest, I suspect it's because of the recommendation, right? And that's one of the things actually that for me is inspiring, sometimes very humbling, which is I've had the opportunity to work with some really amazing people doing really amazing things and getting to be part of their support system and kind of helping them with the ongoing, continuous improvement, continuous learning. That's what keeps me engaged. So I suspect it was, the referral that got me here. I think it was Season, if I recall.
It was Season Hughes.
And
Correct.
Season is absolutely amazing. And honestly, I'm really honored that Season would recommend me. I suppose, in addition to that, my claim to fame in a little corner of the world is I wrote 2 of the best-selling books on Scrum. And I've been doing Agile Learning Labs, which is the company that I started, 18 years ago, to help companies continuously improve, to try to make environments that are more humane, where people are happier and more productive. And it's been an amazing journey. I feel like I'm really fortunate. I found this thing that I love doing. I seem to be good at. It seems like it makes the world a better place in some ways, and people value it and are willing to pay for it. And I feel really, really fortunate after a life of trying all sorts of different things to have found something that lines up in all 4 of those dimensions.
You're correct. It was the recommendation. However, when Season Hughes tagged you in the post of me looking for the next guest, I, of course, went to your LinkedIn. And as soon as I started seeing your background and your posts, I was like, oh, my goodness, this is literally the reason why I'm having this podcast, to learn how to be better, how to improve. This is the actual chef's kiss. So you quite earned a spot on any place that people will have want to learn how to be better. And so I really, really appreciate you being here. All right. Talking about pregame, I would be interested in, you mentioned this as we were talking before I hit record, a little bit about what you did in a prior life. Walk me through your background of how you got to the place of founding Agile Learning Labs before we get into the deep questions, because I think that's fascinating.
All right. Well, so my career arc, if you go back far enough, I worked at Burger King, made a lot of Whoppers. I was a vegetarian at the time.
Interesting.
So something about expressing my personal values through my work had just not dawned on me, right? Quite frankly, young Chris was not that bright. Then I became an auto mechanic, which was a little bit better fit. I was and still, kind of am a car enthusiast. So, progress, I suppose. And then I became a professional musician, and I did that through most of my 20s. Really enjoyed it, made very little money. But to this day, I still cannot bring myself to cut the hair.
At
But
least you have it. My hairline is gone, so good
well,
for
I
you.
was going to say it's not going to be an issue much longer because, it's disappearing at quite an alarming rate. But somewhere in my late 20s, I had this epiphany. I realized there was something missing in my life: regular income. And so I went to college to turn my hobby, which was writing computer programs, into something I could do for a living. So came out of University of Illinois, moved out to Silicon Valley, had a really typical software developer career, right? It was like developer becomes manager, becomes director kind of a thing. And it was while I was at a company that does kind of high-end financial software that I first encountered this stuff that we now call Agile. We didn't have that word yet because this was like early 2000, late 1999, somewhere in there. And I'd run across a group of folks who were doing a thing called extreme programming. And it made a lot of sense to me. I was like, this would be a way that, we could organize a bunch of smart people and they would probably be really productive and build a great product. And so I brought that to the team I was working with. And sadly, we had actually just come off of a long development effort where a lot of work happened, but no product ever shipped. And it really was, I think, for lack of coordination, because the people on the team were amazing people. So I brought this approach to them and they were kind of easygoing. They were like, sure, Chris, we'll try it. And honestly, it changed all our lives. That same group of people came together, became a truly high performing team, built a really amazing product, gave our stakeholders, great visibility and predictability about what they were going to get. The product really hit the market need. The quality of the product was really high. And it was an amazing experience. It was very much a life-changing experience. And really, I've spent the rest of my career helping people work in that way. Initially, it was at that company, right? As I was promoted and, had more folks, kind of under me, if you will, helping more and more people work that way. And then eventually went out and started Agile Learning Labs in 2007. And here I am, right? Working with companies that are adopting Agile practices, most commonly practices around Scrum, or that are kind of evolving and improving their Agile practices. So that's kind of how I got here. And it's been a really interesting journey.
It's a great journey. I also tried the music route as well and realized I needed to make money. So I understand that. And I want to start with being as simple as possible, because I think in my intro, I said something a little bit different and I realized I need some education on what you do. But for folks that are not engineers or familiar with what you're talking about, what is Agile? I think I called it Agile or something weird. What is Agile in plain English, and what problems was it meant to originally solve?
So let's see. Let me start with how I think about it today. And how I think about it today is it very much meaning working in ways that align with the standard kind of English definition of the word agile, right? So working in ways that are fast, flexible, adaptable. The term kind of originally became popular after a group of software process experts got together in 2001 at this little gathering in the Snowbird Resort in Utah. And they kind of adopted the term agile, and it was a description of kind of, at the time, they called them lighter weight methodologies. So ways of building software, organizing projects that weren't quite as heavyweight as the techniques that were predominantly used at the time. And so this agile approach grew out of the software development space. But fast forward to today, and the ways of working that have come out of that movement turn out to work really well for all kinds of complex work, right? The kind of work where you need multiple people with different skills to work together in order to achieve some kind of goal that's, in a complex domain. Agile ways of working are really appropriate. Basically, it's admitting that we can't know everything up front. We can't plan and predict every step. So we're going to have to inspect and adapt as we're doing the work. And that makes sense in an awful lot of domains.
And you said that this methodology came about in the early 99, 2000, or when was the the birth of this, would you say?
Yeah. So the folks who did kind of like the early work in it were active. Gosh, even in the 80s, quite honestly, but definitely in the 90s and the late 90s, Scrum was happening, extreme programming was happening, and these were all particular examples of ways of working that now we think of as agile. And it was at this get together of some of the practitioners and some of the originators of those approaches that they tried to find, what's the common ground? They were kind of looking for like the unifying theory underneath all of their approaches. And while I was not at that gathering, I've spoke to many of the people who were there. And my understanding is it was 3 days and they spent the first day coming together on, something that ultimately now is called the Agile Manifesto. It's these, four values and 12 principles. And then they spent the rest of the time arguing about all the details.
I think you can see a lot of that. Don't they have a website, a web page that just is pretty straightforward and almost black and white in how this all came about? I think I went to that.
Yeah, agilemanifesto.org. And that site's been up, I think, since 2001, and it really hasn't changed because it really was just capturing that snapshot in time.
You mentioned something a couple of times. I want to make sure I get this right. Is Scrum and Agile, are those interchangeable?
Well, they end up getting used interchangeably a lot, but they're not. The way I think about it is Agile is the bigger overarching term, right? It really describes any way of approaching the work that is fast and flexible and all of that. Scrum is a particular framework. It's a particular way to organize the people in the work, in an approach that would be agile. So think of it as a way to be agile. Maybe an analogy would be Scrum is to agile as, Chevrolet is to car.
Okay.
Right.
All
So
right.
car's the overarching term. Chevy's a particular, brand or type.
Is Scrum like the Ferrari or the higher version, luxury version of a car underneath it? Or how would I?
Goodness. Oh, this will get me in trouble. I will say in some ways, no, it really is more the Chevrolet. And here's why I say that. Of the approaches, especially going back to, when I started, 99, 2000, Scrum was one of the simplest, right? I actually started with an approach that was called extreme programming. And extreme programming is basically Scrum, which has all the how do you coordinate the people and various inspect and adapt loops to keep things on track. XP takes that and then adds on top of it a bunch of technical practices that make it really robust for software product development. And, early on in my journey with this, I was like, Scrum, that's weak tea or something. And, XP, that's what everyone should be doing. But I think that Scrum kind of won the day. It became the popular one, in part because it was simpler. It didn't ask so much. And the underlying idea was that, well, if you're continuously improving, you're going to discover the practices that work. So we don't need the framework to prescribe all these practices. So it kind of won, if you will, the framework or methodology. It is much more generalized than some of the other approaches. And it's definitely the one that, most places use these days, which is, I think, why for a lot of folks, the terms Scrum and Agile are kind of interchangeable.
Okay. I've learned something already because I remember seeing the sticky boards and hearing people at various places I worked. And I'm like, that's just for smart people. I'm just going to keep that over there because I was almost intimidated. Not almost, I was intimidated. So I'm just going to go do HR work. And we're going to talk about how I could actually use this to influence the HR work. But
oh, yeah.
Super helpful.
That's absolutely complex work. So,
yeah.
A lot of this would apply for sure.
Take me back to the 99, 2000 era when you kind of were first introduced to this. What was the actual moment that you realized, oh, wait, this actually changes everything. This way of working is the way.
Well, so as I kind of alluded to in my earlier little story, I was working at this place, had a lot of really bright people. They tried to hire from, the best colleges and universities, right? So, not to offend anyone who's not in the list, but, they hired from MIT, Stanford, Berkeley, University of Illinois, maybe one or two others. So a lot of bright people there. They had a culture that resonated with me, and I believed this at the time, that if you have smart people, everything else will get figured out and great things will happen. And I really, really believed that. And then they gathered a whole bunch of the best and brightest inside the company together for this big new initiative. It's back when the web was happening. And they're like, we need to do stuff on the web. It's a little bit like companies now who are like, we need to do something with AI. And so they gathered all the smartest people. And then, somehow I managed to weasel myself into that too. And boy, all the brightest folks did a whole ton of work and nothing ever came of it. And it rocked my world, right? It really shook this core belief that I had that like, oh, the smart people will figure it out. And it's like, oh, smart people worked really hard and didn't figure it out. And so I started looking around for, all right, how do you coordinate and organize the smart people? And I found the field of project management. I started reading up on that, learning about Microsoft Project and Gantt charts. And I was always like, I guess if this is how it's done, okay, sure. But it never quite felt right. And then kind of surfing around back in the day, there was a lot that went on Usenet news groups. And I stumbled onto this Usenet news group that led me to the very original wiki, the C2 wiki. And here were these people talking about how they were organizing their work and their teams, right? Extreme programming and some of the related ideas. And the light bulb went on for me. I'm like, oh, this would work. This fits. This feels like natural and appropriate and smart. And I got really excited and geeked out on it. And like I say, eventually they let me help to organize the next effort using those ideas and that approach. And same people who had failed came together, became a high performing team and knocked it out of the park. And for anyone who's ever been on a truly high performing team, whether it's a work team, a sports team, in any context, really, it can be a peak life event. And for me, it really was. And for the other folks on that team, it really was. It changed everybody's life. And that was it. The hook was set. And here I am.
Okay. And I was actually trying to recall in my brain, what would be my peak team moment? And that's a really good question. I'm going to have to figure that one out because it doesn't necessarily pop off the top of my head, which actually concerns me a little bit. Thinking about your early journey, you were a developer, you were a manager, like even before Agile, you had your journey, you became a director. What did your early leadership lessons teach you about how not to run a team even before you got involved with Agile?
Yeah. And this is something I learned actually as a band leader back when I was a musician, because for the last half of my musical career, I figured out that the way that I could have some kind of security was to be the band leader, which mostly meant you owned the PA system and, you booked the gigs, because I was never the most gifted musician. So, I was always at risk of being replaced when some, better bass player came along. But a thing I learned then and then really came to understand when I got into management is that if you treat the people around you, right, on your team or in your group, simply as extensions of you, right, as ways that you can amplify your contribution, that is not the optimal strategy, right? Because the people around you, hopefully, have areas where they far outshine you. And the trick is to figure out how to support them and let them do their thing and contribute in the ways that they are really gifted in and in ways that are maybe beyond you, as intimidating as that can be. And I found that when I was trying to control everything and just get people to, oh, I've got this vision, just here, I'm going to tell you your part and you do your part, it limited what the whole group could do, in part because often I was the bottleneck. Right? Like, oh, all the key decisions have to go through Chris, and, ideas that aren't Chris's ideas. Oh, those aren't going to be popular. So people just would hold them back. And, and so the group never could become any greater than me, really. And that's not the way a great team works. Right? So as a leader, I learned I had to make room for everybody to really step into their own spotlight, let them to do their thing.
Question real quick.
Yeah.
Was there a review? Was there a mentor? Was there somebody that knocked you and said, hey, man, I see what's going on. Be better. What happened?
So a couple of things. So one goes back to being a musician, right? I was not the most gifted musician at all. And early on, I thought, especially if I'm going to be the band leader, I've got to think about how everything's supposed to work and the arrangements. People got frustrated because it was clear to everybody that there were other people in the band who had this stuff figured out way better than I did. And eventually what worked was for me to just step aside and say, hey, tell me where you need me. Tell me how I can support your vision. And, finding ways to be the glue. Right? Filling in the missing bits and the gaps and helping people communicate and, doing the stuff nobody else wanted to do. And yeah, providing leadership and direction, certainly. But yeah, that feel. And when I was trying to like be the leader I thought I needed to be, how to say it? I always felt like a little bit of a fraud, like, oh God, I'm faking this. And so that was part of it. But then fast forward to my kind of tech career, business career, there was a moment that just landed on me so hard. I've got two now. So one of them was I had this brilliant design for this new part of the system. And I was, doing my due diligence and gathering the other smart people together and, getting their input. And one of the quietest folks at one point was like, oh, I'm concerned about blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, no, I've thought about that. And it's going to work like this and this and this. It's going to be fine. It's going to be great. And he kind of nodded and was quiet. And we built the system based on my design. And then there turned out to be this really big problem and issue. And it wasn't until I looked into it, I'm like, how could this happen? And I realized that was the thing that Kenrick was talking about. Kenrick was his name. And I realized he saw this. Like at the moment, I didn't grasp like what he was trying to say. And he just was like, okay, you're the leader. I'll defer to you. And so I went and talked to him. I said, hey, we're facing this big thing. Months ago, you said this. Was that about? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, and I realized that because I was trying to lead, right? Everybody follow me. I was missing all of this input from people who were way brighter than me. And what I needed to do was like lead less, like maybe lead more from kind of the back of the room and just make sure that the right people were in the room and the conversations were happening and that they were generally pointed in the right direction. But I needed to be listening more. I needed to be like in that moment, if I could go back and do it again, right? I'd be like pulling more information out of him. I'd be like, oh, tell me more about that, right? Even though I think I know what he's talking about and I think it's already taken care of, like trying to be more curious, right? And pull that stuff out. Because it turns out he had a much deeper grasp of the whole system in his head than probably anybody else in the room. But because I was the loud one and I was the more senior one, right? He shut down.
Let me ask a question from Kendrick's perspective. If you're a Kendrick out there, what could he have done better, if anything, in that circumstance, right? Because you don't want to outshine your boss or be disrespectful or push back too hard. Is there something he could have done to get through?
So I'd like to think that pushing a little harder and sharing more of his thought process, maybe, right, if he was going to try to play it safe, catching me later and being like, hey, I know you've probably got it all figured out, but I'm worried about this and then this and then this and then this. So I think that those sorts of things. But all of that said, I think that the fact that there was this power dynamic.
Yeah.
Right. I was more senior. I had the higher title. I was the one at the front of the room, like leading everything. Made it much more likely that we were each going to behave the way that we did. And I think that part of actually being good in a position of leadership or power starts with being aware of that power dynamic and, finding ways to try to compensate for it. Right. Because usually the people who have the power are not fully aware of the magnitude of the power dynamic at play. Right. I can't tell you how many managers I have coached who tell me, oh, yeah, technically I'm their manager, but we're all just peers around here and I have an open door policy and people can talk to me about anything and they know that.
Yeah.
And I'm there doing some coaching with the team and people are telling me things that they're definitely not telling that manager. And so then part of my job as a coach is to say, well, actually, that's not how it is, right? People actually do watch what they say around you. And that's hard for people to hear and hard for folks to adjust to. But I think it's really important.
I see that a lot as I'm coaching managers as well. The key part there, the takeaway is awareness, doing a regular inspection of how you're showing up, how people respond around you, how you're leading the team in a real way, asking for feedback on how it is in an open way that people feel comfortable doing that. But it all starts with that awareness and that self-awareness that you have to have, even as if you're not a manager. As an IC, having that self-awareness is so critical to making sure you can grow. So that's a really good call out.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to the next segment. We're going to keep going deeper here, but we're going to call this the power up segment and
all right,
talk about skill building and career moves. And so I mentioned this earlier. Agile is often seen as the sticky notes in your stand-up meetings, and I always heard the buzzwords Scrum and all the other stuff that I had no idea and I was intimidated by. What did I and what do people get wrong about Agile today?
I think the thing that I see most commonly is people learn some practices, right? We should do this, right? We should have a meeting where we all stand up and have sticky notes, but they don't understand the underlying reason, the underlying why behind the practice. And so if you end up just doing the practice, but you don't know why, it becomes, well, first off, it doesn't have a lot of value. And it becomes, oh, I don't know, like we're just performing this thing. And it feels like overhead and all of that. My very common example of this is the daily Scrum or the daily stand-up meeting. And for a long time, the way this was taught to people was, oh, you get the team together and everybody answers 3 questions, right? What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? And what impediments do I see? The thing is, if you do that, right, everyone shows up and goes, oh, yesterday I worked on this and today I'm going to work on that. And yeah, no problems today. I mean, that's a status meeting, right? We're all going to walk away from that going, why did we do that? How did that make things better, right? Can I please have that 15 minutes back? What people weren't taught, sadly, was like, what's the purpose of a daily Scrum, right? And the purpose is for a team, right? A group of people who are trying to work interdependently towards common goals to every day inspect and adapt their plan for the work so that every day they can make the most effective plan for that day, right? Like as we're doing the work, we're discovering things about the work. And so if we come together and say, hey, of all the work we know about, what do we think is the most important work to focus on today? And how are we all going to work together to do that work? Right. That's the purpose of it, is to come away with a plan for the day that the whole team is really confident is addressing the most important stuff. And that performative way, the 3 questions, doesn't really do that. Right. And I've seen teams that do a variation on that where they answer the 3 questions. So it's like, okay, we know what got done yesterday. Everybody shares what they think they should do today. But then afterwards, we all step back and go, okay, well, let's look at all the pieces of work that nobody signed up for. Are any of those more important than the ones that people did sign up for? And if so, let's kind of readjust. That can work. Some people, like my good friend and often colleague, Season, will go so far as to say, we just have to abandon the 3 questions entirely. And, I would not argue with that, right? Because I think people got so wrapped up in we're supposed to do this as opposed to why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? What's the purpose? Right. And the purpose is, as a team, we inspect and adapt the work we're doing so that every day we make sure we're doing the most important work. So, yeah, I mean, that's a classic example. And I think in the Agile space, there is just over and over lots of examples of that, of people who learn a practice, right? Do step 1, step 2, step 3. But if they don't know why, they end up doing this stuff, but it doesn't really have a lot of benefit because they don't.
That's a really good call. And I led a team, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago now, and we would have the daily 15-minute stand up and we would do the 3 questions and then we would all go our separate ways. And we never really did get to your point of what are we actually accomplishing in this meeting? And it was like, are we doing this for connection? It felt performative after the second week. It felt like a waste of time. I went from 5 days a week to 3 days a week because it felt like it was just this repetitive nonsense. But I actually feel embarrassed because I never once asked the question, what am I really trying to accomplish by this? It did feel cool as a team. We all turned around because we were in a pod together and we had our morning kumbaya. Yeah, I should have asked what are we really trying to accomplish? And so that's a really good call for anybody out there that's doing daily stand-ups. There is an actual point to them, but make sure you're asking the why and what are you actually getting the impact from that. So very good call there. Let's go back to you being an engineering leader. Is there a specific, once again, I'm trying to get specific so people can actually put themselves in your shoes or figure this out in a little bit more practical way. Was there a time that using Agile principles saved a project or saved a team or brought something back from the ashes? I know you mentioned you had all those smart people that tried to develop something but never launched a product. But what about when it was pulling something back from almost its death?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. So that first, truly agile team that I was on, where we were using extreme programming, one of the practices that we used was test automation and in particular, writing tests before we wrote, the code for whatever it was we were building. So basically, you're building a piece of software it's going to have some behaviors, right? Like, oh, if I want to open a file, I click on the file menu and I click open, and I should be able to see the files I have and then choose one and open it. So that's a behavior. And then underneath the hood, right, there's all this code that makes it happen. So one of our practices was, before you add any new behavior, you write tests that will exercise that behavior and show that it works. And so that way, anything that our product did, there were tests that would validate that it's all working. And it was one of those things where in the moment, it always feels like, oh, it's making us go slower. But actually then it enabled us to go faster. But where it really saved our bacon was, I think it was the second big release of this product. So we had our first release that went well. People loved it. So then we started adding new stuff to it. We were and this is back in the day of like shrink wrap software, right? People would like, put a disk in their computer and install your program. And so we were in the beta test period, and every day the team would gather together and we'd look through any bugs that had come in. And one day this weird bug came in and we're like, oh, what's up with that? And we dug into it and we found, gosh, there really is this fundamental underlying issue. The problem was fixing it was going to require really, really, really low-level changes in the code, like down in the deep, dark, scary parts, right? Where like, oh, if you change anything down there, everything above it might come crumbling down. And for any other product that I'd been involved with, this would have just stopped the release. It would have been like, we're not going to hit our date. We're not going to release when we thought we would. We're going to have to delay everything by, several months to implement this fix and then test everything and fix everything and whatever. Because we had been really disciplined about all the automated testing, we were able to attack that really scary change, come up with a fix, right? And it took a couple of days to like design and come up with this fix. And sure enough, it fixed the original problem, but it broke about 20% of the rest of the product. The good news was we knew what 20% was broken, right? Because all those tests were failing. And so for the rest of the week, every time we got together at our daily stand-up meeting, we were just like looking at like the things that were broken, and we were just pairing up and like, okay, we'll take this one. All right, we'll take this one. Over the course of the week, it went from, 20% of the product is broken to 15 to 10 to 5. Eventually everything was working. And a week later, we all gathered in a conference room and looked at each other, right? And it was okay. Do we release the product? Is it going to make its original date? And we were all like, yeah, it's going to be okay. And we did it. And really that took something that would have been months of delay and turned it into, we had it completely working in a week. And then a week later, we were completely confident that if we released it, it was going to be safe. And yeah, that version of the product was much more widely adopted, got the company a whole bunch of new business, and actually had fewer field reported bugs than the original version.
I love that story.
Discipline about, I liked what you said earlier about you gotta trust the process. You gotta love the process, right? We had come to have a lot of faith in this approach of write your tests first. And it really, really saved our bacon.
Okay. That's something I think anybody listening, especially you don't necessarily need to be in R&D, having that rigor and sticking, like you said, and trusting that process. That's where it's going to save your bacon. So I'm going to use that phrase now. I've never used that in my life, but all right. People like me and a lot of the listeners to my podcast, they are not engineers. They're not in R&D. What I am personally, selfishly interested in is, where do you see Agile showing up in places like HR, finance, education, just other places? Where do you see it showing up that can help?
Yeah. So where Agile approaches at, Scrum in particular, but other related Agile approaches are really appropriate is any area where you're doing complex work. And for the moment, I'll define complex work as work where when we go into it, we can't possibly know everything we're going to need to know. And so we can't just like make a step-by-step plan and then just follow that step-by-step plan and everything's going to be perfect. And it's particularly appropriate when we need people who have different skills, different backgrounds, different perspectives to work together effectively, right? To do all of that kind of inspecting and adapting and continuous improvement and learning. And so sure, software product development fits that description really well, but so do lots of other things, right? So I've ended up working with a number of biotech teams where they're not creating software, right? They're like designing molecules and formulating experiments and analyzing data. But it's complex work and it takes different kinds of specialists to work together to do it. And Scrum is a great fit. I worked with a group in the Air Force, actually, that were using Scrum to do flight testing. So anytime, there's a change in the equipment on one of these military aircraft, before that new thing can be rolled out, there's a group that does really rigorous testing, including, taking it up in the air and making sure it does everything it needs to do. Again, right, their team was very diverse. Pilots, various sorts of equipment specialists, analysts, etc., and very complex work. And agile approaches worked well. Works really well in marketing. It works really well in education. I have a very good friend, shout out to Paula Espinosa, who uses agile practices to help schools improve. And again, very complex systems, right? You got kids, you've got teachers, you've got administration, you've got parents, you've got policy changes. It's like everything's changing all the time. And to do it really well, agile approaches are a great fit because you need to constantly inspect and adapt, see what's working, see what's not working, make an adjustment. And then one of my favorite stories is I've had a few people who've gone through my classes and then gone back home and applied these practices at home at the family level.
Yeah.
The first one that I knew about was a product owner at Autodesk, actually, way back in the day. And, I'd done a workshop with their team and then came back, was doing some coaching. And, so I was talking to them. I'm like, oh, how's it going? And they're like, oh, yeah, the team totally gets it. It's really helping us do our work better. He said, but, what I want to talk about with you is how we're using it at home. I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, my wife, I work from home, and my wife and I, operate this family farm and we homeschool our kids. And we are now kind of doing everything at home using Scrum. We have a board. The chores are up on the board. Every week we plan together as a team. What are the things we're going to do this week and who's going to do what chores and what other things are going on. The homework goes up on the board. At the end of every week, we do a family retrospective where we talk about what well, didn't go well, what we want to try differently next week. And he said, it's amazing. And I was like, oh, look at that. Right. So yeah, I think these concepts and practices broadly applicable.
Fascinated by that. I have 3 kids. There's work, and then there's the side work, and then my wife has a dog boarding business, and I have a board on the refrigerator, and I have Google Sheets. We have another calendar over there. And I'm wondering if I need to maybe try to organize that a little bit. I'm fascinated by that, by using it at home. That's interesting. I always thought it for the smart people that doing all the coding and stuff that I had no idea about. But if it can make me more organized and get things done, and I feel like I just have a jumble of mess in my head at all times because there's just 1,000 things. There's my actual job that there's so much going on, and then I have to go be dad, and there's so much things going on. So that's interesting. I might actually think about how I can apply that because I like the possibilities that I might have there.
Let's maybe we can get together again, in the future. You can let me know how that goes.
I will let you know because I'm going to do this. I'm already thinking about, let me get me one of those rollable whiteboards and I'm going to bring it into it. My wife's going to wonder why the heck I keep saying we need to get rid of stuff, but now I need a rollable whiteboard. Anyway, all right. Your company teaches Agile in a fun game-based way. Tell me why you think traditional trainings fail. And from all of this, what do you think you've learned about how adults actually learn at work?
Yeah. So I think traditional workshops and trainings aren't so effective, perhaps for 2 primary reasons. Number one, I think all too often they are focused on transmitting knowledge, right? Oh, you're going to gain this new knowledge. Like, well, okay, I could gain knowledge from reading a book. I could gain knowledge from watching a video. Well, knowledge is necessary. I think what makes the big difference is developing skill. And I think that's where a workshop, right, has that next dimension that, say, a book or a video doesn't have, which is the feedback loop. You're not just reading about it or hearing about it. You're trying it and you're doing it and you're getting feedback about how you're trying and doing it. And then you get to try it a different way. And, I think by actually doing it, we learn better and we actually develop skill, not just knowledge. And I guess that's related to the other reason why I think a lot of traditional approaches kind of fall flat is, a lot of people still are essentially standing in front of PowerPoint slides and lecturing, right? And the thing is, if you're bored, you're not learning, right? And so early on in my journey, I had encountered some folks who were doing all of their teaching using simulations and games. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. right? And I was like, this is how I'm going to do it. Because when I first started to do this, I was making PowerPoint decks. And then after I had this experience of this other approach, I was like, oh, right, put away the PowerPoint. How can I get people to kind of get their hands on the ideas and the concepts and start to work with them and play with them and get the learning in at a much deeper level? And it really works. And it just happened that in the Agile space, I was one of the first, I don't know, maybe the first, there were probably other people who was really focusing on and popularizing like learning games. I'd go to conferences and I'd be like, hey, let's play this, let's play that, let's play this. And it's engaging and people learn stuff. And so maybe at least a little bit through my influence and other people who were thinking similarly too, I can't claim to be the originator of this. There kind of became a whole movement in the Agile space of, creating Agile learning games and stuff like that. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I know I learn that way. A lot of my world is doing PowerPoint decks and trying to communicate. And I know as I'm creating them, I don't want to watch this or listen to it or read it. But yet I'm still going to create this in hopes that other people, because I have to communicate a lot of change or a lot of updates in a way that people are going to be able to absorb. I don't know if it's practical for me to make games or gamify all the change that I have to do, all the updates, but that's very fascinating to think about of, is there a way for me to be able to make the work and the content that I'm trying to communicate to my different groups? How do I give that in a way that's not just a PowerPoint? Because I don't want to read them. I don't want to go through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be fair, PowerPoints, emails, videos are really great for information.
Yeah.
Right. So if what you're doing is like information flow, like, oh, hey, everybody, you need to know these 5 things that are going on. Okay, great. Right. Those are good ways to share information. But if what you're really trying to do is build skill and capability, then that's probably not optimal.
Yeah. Okay. I think this might be a good segue. The next segment is called the playbook. We're going to talk strategy, teams, tough calls. And you kind of answered it in this last question, but we know Agile is just a set of values and principles. Why does it fall apart in so many companies then? Is it the learning part of it? Is it more to that?
So I have frequently said Scrum is really simple. Like I can literally describe what is Scrum in 10 minutes or less. At our website, agilelearninglabs.com, and on our YouTube channel, there's some videos of me doing just that. So Scrum is really simple, but doing it, using it effectively is really hard. And it's because of people, right? People are really complex. And though we don't like to admit it, we're not particularly rational. Right? We're very emotion driven, and we're emulators without even realizing it, right? We emulate behaviors that we've seen before, even if we don't like those behaviors, right? For people who are parents, as far as I know, I'm not a parent, but for my friends who are parents, many of them have told me they have this experience of, when I become a parent, I'm never going to do this, this, and this that my parents did. And then they become a parent and all of a sudden they hear their mother or their father's voice coming out of their mouth.
Happens
right?
to me daily.
Yeah. And I think part of that is the automatic parts of us. Like when we don't know anything better, we just emulate what we've seen before. And especially when the pressure's on. Right. And I see this a lot with organizations that will say adopt Scrum. Right. It's this team-based approach to working and people really like it. And there's way more collaboration and, oh yeah, this is way better than what we used to do. And part of it is the teams have to be empowered. Right. But then something catches fire and some big boss runs in and starts telling people what to do. Right. Cindy, jump on this. Right. Bob, do this. And boom, we went right back to what we used to do before, even though we had all agreed that didn't serve us, right? But when the pressure's on, it's just the most natural thing to do is to fall back on what we always did. And so I think that makes it that much harder to get the most out of these, better ways of working, is that the old ways are so baked in. And like I say, human beings, we're messy. We're not so rational all the time. Also, I think organizations are these very complex systems. And there's a lot of forces at play that lead people to engage in behaviors that really are not optimal for the overall system, right? Like if we really want to optimize for, we're going to create an environment where the best and the brightest come and they thrive and they build great things. There's all sorts of behaviors that are counter to that. Lots of organizations, either knowingly or unknowingly, are incenting. right? And so these forces at play that lead people to make choices that are optimal for them, given the pressures that are being applied to them, but are not optimal for the big picture. Like that happens all the time. And so I think those are some of the reasons.
And let me dig on the best and the brightest, because that one hits home, I think. In my LinkedIn stalking, you posted about meritocracy, and you said it's a dangerous myth.
Yeah.
Give me a breakdown. Like, is there a deeper lesson for people that are leading teams or companies and the systems that you were talking about that companies are?
Yeah. So, I mean, meritocracy sounds great. People who do great things, right? Those are the people who will succeed here. And those are the ones who get promoted. And it's just all based on, what you do. It sounds great. But it actually leads to this culture of internal competition where people are optimizing for making themselves look good, not necessarily optimizing for achieving the company's goals or the team's goals or that. And it's definitely not a recipe for teamwork and collaboration. So in a space where, say, really bright individuals can do everything that needs to happen in order for success to happen, whatever success is, okay, great. Meritocracy, that sounds great. But if we're doing really complex work where we need people to work together, meritocracy can create this honestly toxic environment where people are competing and making sure they look good. And by the way, making sure that other people don't look good, right? And so that's kind of what's going on there. What was it that I heard once? If you create a culture where you reward the heroes that put out the fires, you will breed a culture of secret arsonists.
I think I weirdly heard that, but yes, that hit.
And so, I think what we want to create is environments where the group of people necessary to accomplish the greater goal are aligned on accomplishing that goal. Right. So it's not so much about, well, what's my work? It's more about like, together, when are we going to get this thing across the finish line? And that takes some nuance and subtlety to kind of create an environment where that's really what is incented and rewarded.
That's a great call. And I hope people that are listening, that does take some time to sit and absorb and what that actually means, because my autopilot is, I want to be better. Now, I don't want to say my autopilot is, let me make you over there look bad, but that is something that ends up happening where you saw that Cindy didn't kind of get that report in on time. Hey, mine was done. I'm just saying, and that's not the right behavior. That's clearly not what we're out to do. Even if you're in a sales role, right, where you want to be the number one salesperson, but you can make all your money and you don't have to push people down. Or I don't know. There's a lot of thinking around that. That's a good call. I need to unpack that one, but I like that. All right, last question in this segment. Shoot, we're already at an hour, which is insane. We're going to wrap up a little bit. But if someone listening today wants to make their team more agile, what is the first thing you're going to tell them to stop doing? And what's the first thing you're going to tell them to start doing?
I would say stop focusing on utilization. So one of the traps I see all the time is, we have these 5 specialists on the team, and we want to make sure that we're utilizing each person to their maximum. So we're trying to find work for each person that will keep them fully busy in their area of specialty, because then they're fully utilized. But companies don't exist to utilize people, right? Companies exist to create value. And so instead, focus on delivering the most valuable stuff as quickly as possible. And it turns out that if you optimize for that, that's a different thing than optimizing for utilization. And so if you optimize for, throughput, optimize for delivering the valuable stuff as quickly as possible, that actually most of the people will be quote unquote underutilized. They'll actually have some slack time. And that turns out to be the highest performing state for the system as a whole. And if that sounds kind of intriguing, there's a theory around this. It's called the theory of constraints. The Wikipedia page for it's pretty good, at least it was last time I looked. And there's a book that's actually a really fun read. It's an easy read called The Goal by Elihu Goldratt. And it's a novel, but it's a business novel. And it kind of really walks through like, why is this the case? Right? Why is it that, optimizing for each individual person isn't going to actually give us the best overall result, right? We have to actually back up, optimize for the overall result, and then let each individual person find what's their best contribution to getting that overall result completed as quickly as possible. And it's hard because it's easier to manage for utilization and busyness than it is to manage for throughput and actual delivery.
My first thought goes to, I know a lot of professional services teams, that's literally one of their metrics is on utilization, right? And because then I can bill based on you being out in the field, right? And it feels almost counterintuitive. But if you're saying that we can get more out of people, that is another huge thing that we need to unpack, where I don't have the time today, but that is, I'm going to go to the wiki page and I'm going to do some digging there, because that is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, what are we trying to solve for?
And your example is a perfect one. So professional services firms, right, that are billing, right? The force working at there is to optimize billable hours, right? Which is not the same thing as optimizing for getting the client's work done as quickly as possible, right? So if this firm comes in, right, maybe a staff augmentation firm, and they're doing some project or building some product for their client, right? What the client wants is, hey, we want our stuff, right? How soon can we have our stuff? But what the staffing firm wants is to keep everybody billable so we can bill as much as we can. And so those are different things to optimize for. And in that case, because the forces aren't aligned, the goals aren't aligned, probably the end result, right, getting the product out the door, getting the project done, isn't going to happen optimally because the goals aren't aligned and the forces aren't aligned.
So maybe you're changing to an outcome-based pricing strategy versus, that's a whole other thing to unpack, but right, you still need that revenue, right? So I'm not suggesting people in professional services, well, you should do less.
Yeah.
We're doing this to make some money. So maybe it's outcome-based pricing to offset that, but that's really interesting to unpack that one.
It is. Yeah.
Okay, we need to talk more about that one, because that's very interesting. All right, last segment before there's kind of a segment after that, but it's a 2-minute quick question, quick answer.
Right.
But the next segment is called the play. So let's talk about a role play situation, a scenario.
All right.
And I'm curious to how you would approach it. So a company just did a reorg. Now you have 3 layers of managers above the team.
Mm-hmm.
Morale's low, projects aren't shipping, and stand-ups, like we talked about, they feel performative. If you're brought in, which I imagine you've been brought into situations like this quite a bit, if you're brought in as the Agile coach, what would you do in week 1, day 1 and week 1?
Yeah. So here are the things I would be looking for, right? So first I want to go in and try to be curious. I'm looking for patterns. One of the things that is a way that consultants and outside people can add a lot of value is, gosh, because we have been inside lots of companies, we've seen patterns. We've seen success patterns. We've seen failure patterns. And so we can kind of sniff these out, right, when we start to see the symptoms. So I'd be really curious, like, oh, what are the patterns at play here? Patterns that I would really be looking for, given the symptoms that you described, is a pattern that I call everybody's busy, but delivery is slow. And I've written a couple of articles about that. So, if you search on the Agile Learning Labs website for everyone is busy, you'll find the articles. If I boil it down, most of the time it comes down to we're trying to do too much. And by trying to do too much, nothing's getting done. And so part of that becomes making the work visible, and then working with leaders on the discipline to stop trying to do everything, right? It's not about starting on all the important stuff. It's about finishing the most important stuff.
Yeah.
And so, stop starting, start finishing. And then the other thing I would look at, because you talked about morale being low, right? And sometimes that's just because we're working so hard, but nothing ever seems to get done. But also, very often morale is low when the people are not in touch with why we're doing what we're doing. And I see this with development teams. I see this sometimes with support teams, where they just get these tickets and their job is to close the ticket, right? Do the work so you can close the ticket. Well, closing tickets isn't very inspiring. But if you can help get people in touch with the people that their work makes a difference for, so that they start to understand, what is the impact of what I do? How is what I'm doing actually making life better in some way for some actual people? That becomes a lot more inspiring. And so I would be looking into, do people know why we're doing what we're doing? And then the last thing I'd be looking for is in the managers, especially as you go higher and higher up the management chain, is what do they think their job is? And lower performing organizations, the managers think their job is to get the work done, right? Oh, we have these objectives and these goals and we got to get this stuff out. And it's all about managing the work. Higher performing organizations, the managers look at their job as creating a high performing organization. right? The people down in the trenches, their job is, creating great products or creating great results, all of that. The manager's jobs is to create an organization that is healthy and high performing so that the organization will naturally produce great results. And so helping, managers and leaders in the organization start to make that shift from, oh, I got to make sure the stuff gets done to, oh, I've got to grow this organization, the people and the capacity and the capabilities so that the work will naturally get done. I don't have to manage the work. So those are things I'd be on the lookout for. Too much work in progress, people not in touch with why we're doing what we're doing, and managers who are too focused on the work and not so focused on like the health of the organization.
The thing that sticks in my head as well is the reminder when you're a support org or you're doing the tickets, finding some places where you can remind those people that are doing those tickets how you're actually affecting your customer or the person that, all these different tickets is just clicking a box. No, this is actually helping. And I think that reminder is huge. That gets lost quite a bit. So I'm going to go back to my leaders and make sure we have the reminder. That's huge. And I think I can see how that could build morale and build some purpose. And once again, it seems simple, but oh my God, maybe I've thought about it years ago, but I forgot. So that's a really good reminder. So I appreciate that one. Last question type segment. And this is not even a sports related segment, but more of a HR selfish related segment. I'm in HR. I am curious as to where do you see HR and Agile working and how can we work better? Like what could HR do better if we were thinking about it through the lens of Agile?
Yeah. So if I think about HR's mission in terms of what I was just talking about, like how do we create a happier, healthier, more productive work environment? Then doing that work, right? Like organizational work and organizational change and organizational improvement work is definitely complex work. And so I think that Agile approaches like Scrum, for example, are really appropriate for that. So I think that's one way these two things can fit together, right? Because if you're trying to help people work better together, that's really complex. And you're going to have to try things. You're going to have to learn. You're going to have to inspect and adapt. The other thing, and this is more specific to environments where we're trying to actually create teams, is recognizing that perhaps some of the traditional HR practices that we hold very tightly to actually don't support teams very well. And a classic one here is the traditional performance review, right? It's like, I've seen this in organizations that adopt Scrum where it's all about the team and the team being high performing and the team delivering great products. And then once a year, right, the managers come around and say, okay, Brian, tell me why you should get a higher raise than everybody else on the team, right? And so an idea that I saw one of our clients try and have reasonably good success with was they revamped their performance review system for all the people who were on teams. And the way they did it was part of it, the performance part was actually team-based. So there was a whole way of like teams had a team performance and health score that was kind of co-developed with the teams. It was kind of cool. And then half of your performance score at the end of the year was your team's score.
I love that.
And so you're incented to, what can I do to have my team be healthy, to have my team perform better? The other half of the individual score was from the manager, and it was all around professional development. So it wasn't around delivery. It wasn't tell me what things you delivered. Did you accomplish goals X, Y, and Z in terms of delivering stuff? It was all about increasing your capabilities. How did you become a more valuable contributor? What new skills did you develop, et cetera? So everybody had a professional growth plan, and they were working with their manager to make progress on their own personal growth plan. And so half of their performance review was, how are you doing with that?
I love that. And that's, if you're going to build a tool to help an organization, that's probably where you would start in that realm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's probably a real opportunity for, HR systems and tools that are more aligned with teams and team-based behaviors.
I love that. And once again, like you've been just dropping gems this entire time of things where I need to go back to how I can apply this to the teams I help. Last segment, this has just been amazing. I really appreciate this. The last segment is called the 2-minute drill.
Oh, goodness.
Quick questions, quick answers, rapid fire questions. All right. What's the best advice you've ever received about working on a team?
Listen. Okay. Listen way more than you talk.
Listen more than you talk. What's one Agile buzzword you'd love to retire?
Velocity. It's a concept that can be useful, but it has been so abused and so weaponized that, yeah, I see way too much unhealthy focus there.
Okay. What's a leadership trait that's overrated?
The whole like work ethic, like working hard, pulling long hours, being a workaholic. Again, that's more about what you're doing, not what you're delivering.
I don't know if you saw there's a CEO, I think in San Francisco, which during the interview process said, you will be working 80 to 90 hours a week. Are you in or now out? And that was like his actual pitch to people. And he has, of course, a bunch of people that said no, but that was actually something that people got drawn to. And I can't understand how you can even be effective at 80 to 90 hours. So
yeah, I think for most people, right, past a certain point, our productivity goes down. And then if you're doing really complex work, for example, writing code, your productivity probably goes negative because you're probably introducing defects and problems at a higher rate the more hours you work.
And I've seen what's 4 to 6 hours a day. If you go past that, there's probably other studies that have given numbers. Yeah, you're not helping yourself at the end of the day by overdoing it. All right, fill in the blank. The best teams I've ever seen always
celebrated successes.
Forget about that all the time. All right, last question. You have your own company, Agile Learning Labs. This is what you do, is you help people. How can I reach you? How can people reach you? Tell me more about what you do. Give us the website again. I just want to make sure people can connect with you right after this.
Well, I appreciate that. The best way to find out about all the stuff I'm up to and that Agile Learning Labs is up to is come check us out at our website, agilelearninglabs.com. Couple of things that I'd love to just call out, promote a little bit. A couple of times a month, I hold free open office hours. The schedule's on the website, and basically people drop in, they ask questions, they get free coaching. And not only do they get to hear what does Chris think, but we've got a community of regular participants in the office hours, a bunch of really smart people, again, with very diverse backgrounds. And so people chime in and give advice from their perspective. It's a really rich community. It's a great place to come get support. It's also a great place to build your network and all of that.
And that we can find from your website?
Yep, absolutely. And then the other thing I'll call out, since this is all about career stuff, is for people who are job seekers, all of the public workshops that we offer can be accessed for half price. Go to agilelearninglabs.com. You'll find the link to our job seekers page. And yeah, for people who are looking for work, you can get, Scrum certification courses and stuff like that for half price.
I really love that. That's huge. Wow. I've never heard anybody say that and call that out. And that's unfortunately, it's ticking up a little bit. You said there's YouTube. Do you have a YouTube page channel as well?
Agile Learning Labs YouTube channel. And, you can find us directly on YouTube. You can also get there from our website.
All right. First of all, Season, if you're listening, thank you. Chris, this has been amazing.
Oh my goodness, Season, thank you for making this connection. This was so much fun. And so thank you, Season.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your story. This is just a straightforward, real conversation about what we should be and could be doing better. To everyone listening, I hope that you take something from this, and this could be a playbook, and this could be a roadmap on how to be better, how to make your teams better, even HR, how we can be better. I would like to remind everybody at this time, please like the video, please follow and subscribe, not to just the Level Up podcast, but also to Chris's page as well, the Agile Learning page as well. We appreciate that. And once again, this has been the Level Up podcast, the Career Playbook. My name is Brian Bell, and I really appreciate everybody watching and listening wherever you are today. We will see you next time. Take care.